It's not really any kind of secret that Call of Duty is one of the all-time best-selling video game franchises ever, with over 500 million games being sold worldwide. However, somewhere within that cool 500 mil are a bunch of console ports, which, although unique and decent in their own way, aren't all up to snuff with the mainline entries, or the other ways in which these games were meant to be played. I did a video a while back looking at all the main games in the series, but I did skip over a lot of these console versions and ports, which is something that a lot of people brought up. So I thought it might be fun to go back and take a look at all the ones I missed, along with a few of the other, more infamous versions for the other titles we've had over the years. Sound good? Right, let's get into it.
We're all aboard! Go!
Roger that, we're out of here.
Right, so before I get too far into things, I do have to thank Factor75 for sponsoring this video. Now, if you're anything like me, well, during the day, you probably spend a fair bit of time getting distracted by work and playing games, which means you can't be bothered or probably don't even want to think about spending half an hour in the kitchen trying to make something to eat. Plus, I don't really want to go out and get something that's been deep fried or spend $50 on a single meal and all those charges you get through a delivery platform. Well, Factor75 offers up a solution with stress-free, ready-to-eat meals. Now, these are fresh, never frozen meals made by chefs and also approved by dietitians, all ready to go in just 2 minutes. With 35 options that are changed every week, including keto, high protein, and vegetarian choices, along with 60 various snack options too, with breakfast, smoothies, and a bunch of juices. You can order up to 18 meals a week, or even down to as little as 4, as well as pausing or rescheduling your deliveries at any time you want. And it all just goes to eliminate all the hassle that you get with prep time, cooking, and all the cleaning up. So you can simply just heat up your food and then get back to doing what you do best. Now he's running at me! What is this? So if you want to get 50% off your first Factor box and also free shipping, well, be sure to click the link in the video description, or alternatively, scan the QR code on screen now with your phone. And yeah, again, thanks to Factor75 for sponsoring this video. Right, so the first game in the list is Call of Duty Finest Hour, released in 2004 for the PlayStation 2, the GameCube, and the Xbox. And this one is unique in that it's the first COD game that was exclusive to a home console. Loosely based off the same mission structure in the first Call of Duty, with there being a US, a British, and then a Russian campaign, with each campaign offering up vastly different environments, weapons, and often objectives, along with all of them being completely unique to this version, as well as being played in reverse order, with the Russian campaign first and then the US one last. It opens with a very similar mission from the original COD, where you're again experiencing the Battle of Stalingrad through the eyes of a random Russian soldier named Sokolov, beginning the whole thing completely unarmed and having to carry around a handful of rifle bullets while you try to find a weapon and avoid getting killed.
Come quickly! We're expected at the front lines!
And visually, a lot of this stuff is pretty impressive, even by Xbox and PS2 standards, with a high amount of NPC activity to really make it feel like this large-scale hostile battleground. Eventually you get your hands on a weapon of your own, and then from that point on it's just standard shooter fare, with the ensuing mission being one where you work alongside a female sniper, taking out German officers and then sneaking through the sewers and empty buildings to ambush all these enemy soldiers. One mission even has you holding out for like 9 minutes while enemies keep attacking from your left and right flank, and it is asshole puckering stuff. Seeing these guys running up to the front line with machine guns or Panzer Shreks and trying to take them out before they can get a shot off. The only thing that sucks about this campaign is the amount of tank missions it has, with there being 4 of them in total, where you have to hop into these things, slowly driving around these crumbled streets and taking out enemy tanks over and over. And I mean, that might be fine, except there's only 8 Russian missions all up here, and it really feels like you spend more time inside one of these metal death traps than you actually do on foot, running around and shooting at people the old-fashioned way. Anyway, next up you got the British campaign, which thankfully offers up a bit of visual variety. Now taking place in Tunisia, where you get into constant shootouts with the Germans, all whilst getting hot North African sand blown up your ass. This time you're playing as a dude named Sergeant Carlisle, a British commando, going up against Rommel's infamous Afrika Korps, using classic World War II era Pommy weapons like the Sten submachine gun and a goddamn Bren gun to wipe out the Jerrys.
What the fuck was that?
That was the brain gun.
Does also seem like they tried to compensate for this being the shortest campaign out of all three of them by making these the toughest missions in the game. And yes, some of these are absolutely ridiculous. And a big part of that is that they either just forgot to or chose not to put all that many checkpoints in during these missions. I mean, for some of the other ones in the game, I feel like you get checkpoints every 1 or 2 minutes, but for some of these ones, it's more like every 5 or 10. And you end up having to replay these large sections over and over because of it. The worst one by far there is this one where you've got to rescue some random sergeant and then escort the guy through all these ruins. All while enemies are constantly spawning in and coming after you, and I mean, I died at this segment over and over. Maybe I was conditioned to the game by that point, but either way, by the time I got to the US campaign, things did seem a lot easier.
Yeah, the cavalry's here!
Now you're playing as a 1st Infantry soldier named Chuck Walker, which, yeah, might just be the most American sounding name I think I've ever heard.
Relax, Benny. We're gonna knock them all down.
Undertaking all these various operations on the Western Front in Germany during April of 1945, right around the time that Hitler ended up offing himself. Actually making it too one of the few games in the series to have missions set around the end of the war. Now this one starts off with you having to escort some tanks to the town of Aachen, watching out for anti-tank soldiers hiding in the nearby buildings, and then clearing them out so you can proceed onward. And then after that, you've got to go through the sewers and destroy a bunch of access points the Germans are using to reach the street level. Because yeah, like, who doesn't like an entire mission set inside a pitch black series of literal shit pipes?
Can't see shit.
Only to then make it back to the surface and end up having to babysit the tanks yet again throughout the next section of the town. Oh yeah, and you want to know what happens after you've spent all this time escorting those tanks? Because I'll tell ya, it's even more tank missions.
Fuck!
This time controlling one again, playing as a soldier in the 1st Armored Division in Belgium.
We're supporting the 87th today, so watch out for infantry under your tracks.
Because yeah, dog, apparently we didn't get enough of this stuff in the Russian campaign. And this one is the longest one yet, going on for at least like half an hour, with only a couple of checkpoints throughout the whole thing. Followed by, yet again, even more tank escorting, this time back at Germany. And it's kind of like they came up with 2 or 3 ideas for what the missions could be about, and then just repeated it over and over for the entire game. Overall, like, it's not exactly a bad game, but it is far from being one of the best, and I was actually surprised considering before I properly played this, I had so many people telling me to check it out as if it was some kind of underappreciated masterpiece. I mean, as far as World War II era shooters go for consoles at the time, it's fine, but I wouldn't say it's any better than something like Medal of Honor Frontline. Like, if anything, it's on par. It does do that one super annoying thing, though, that pisses me off to no end in these kind of games, where friendly NPCs are assisting you the entire time, but then also constantly fucking getting in your way. Either blocking you in when you're trying to move around, or just standing in front of you when you're trying to shoot at someone off in the distance, and it pisses me off. There's also like this really weird mechanic where when a grenade goes off nearby, it tries to do that thing where it simulates tinnitus where all you hear is a loud ringing in your ears for a few seconds. And I mean, look, like that kind of thing is fine, and it's something that plenty of shooters do, but Finest Hour takes it one step further, and for some reason adds in a slow motion effect, which just makes no sense. But I think the main issue I have with Finest Hour is that at the end of the day, it just doesn't really feel like a Call of Duty game. In fact, if anything, it feels more like a Medal of Honor game. Which is kind of funny to say, considering that the developers, Spark Unlimited, is comprised of people who used to work on the Medal of Honor series. And it really seems to have more in common with that franchise than it does with Call of Duty, with the movement, for instance, feeling a lot slower and heavier, along with borderline input delay when you're aiming down weapons. You can't sprint either, as well as there being those very over-animated reactions from enemies when they get hit by bullets. But then it's also both over and undersensitive at the same time, and the aiming acceleration is just absolutely awful. The sensitivity when aiming down sights for some weapons is higher than when you're hip firing, which is also a dumb idea. And overall, it's kind of like you're controlling someone who's trying to walk around underwater. which is all quite far away from the punchy, almost arcade-like feel to the shooting in the original Call of Duty, which did a great job of combining the realism aspect with that faster and more action-packed tone. But you want to know the thing that really irks me about this game though, is how if you pick up a couple of medkits and then hit a checkpoint and happen to be killed, when you reload back to that checkpoint, for some reason all of those medkits are going to be gone. Like the game just wiped them out of existence completely.
What?
It's not helping either that this thing runs on the renderware engine as opposed to the id Tech 3 or whatever it was they were using back then for Call of Duty. And I don't know if you guys know much about the renderware engine, but this thing was used for everything from Grand Theft Auto 3 to Barbie's Horse Adventures. Which means that when something's running in an engine that was basically the village bicycle for developers at the time, then it makes it feel like it has even less of a personality of its own. And it sure as shit doesn't feel or look like a COD game. For a lot of people though, I'd kinda wager that this was their first introduction to the series, especially if you didn't have a powerful PC, so I can understand how a lot of folks would look back on this one kinda fondly. I mean, believe me, like no one more than me understands the power that nostalgia has. I mean, that shit's a hell of a drug. But playing this now, 20 odd years later, I gotta say it really isn't that great. And it's aged about as well as a carton of jizz kept inside a sauna. The good news is that for the next game on this list, that's not quite the case, with Call of Duty 2 Big Red One. Yeah, Big Red One, that's the same nickname your mother gave my cock. And what's also kind of cool about this one is that it's actually Treyarch's first Call of Duty game they ever made. Ironically though, in terms of the premise and writing, this feels more like a Medal of Honor game, because unlike the other ones where you hop around the globe and play as a bunch of different soldiers, for all of this, you're playing as a member of the US Army's fighting 1st Infantry. This time in the boots of a soldier named Roland Roger. Yes, again, Roland Roger, that is an actual name.
Jesus, Sarge, that ain't making me feel any better.
And a lot of time is also spent developing the relationships and the personalities with the other guys in your squad, with a few of them being well-known actors who are even in Band of Brothers.
Can't we get some air support, sir? It'd sure make this a hell of a lot easier. Look out! Stukas!
Still though, where it matters most, that being the gameplay, this feels far more like Call of Duty, way more than Finest Hour did. Running on Treyarch's in-house engine, which was an earlier version of the same engine that got used in Call of Duty 3. And for the time, it is a pretty decent looking game, with a high amount of environmental detail, lots of particle effects with explosions and gunfire, as well as plenty of background activity to simulate an actual battlefield. You got villages and towns, deserts, beaches, and they even found a way to work in some snowy environments there as well. But the first main thing you notice is just how much smoother this one is to play, with vastly more responsive controls and quicker ADS when firing. There's a subtle lock-on system here too, where if you're aiming in the direction of an enemy and then aim down the sights, you'll kinda snap onto them to make precise shots a lot easier. And it's that usual roster of Thompson submachine guns, M1 Garrons, and whatever else you can get your hands on out there in the field.
You're not that far from me, oh Lord.
There is a tank mission as well this time, but compared to Finest Hour, there's only one of these instead of like half a dozen. So they had the good sense to know not to shoehorn in a bunch of these and not bore the piss out of the player. Plus, this might be one of the first games in the series to use ragdoll physics, and this comes from that era where ragdolls meant someone basically turned into a stunt dummy when they died, resulting in some truly whackin' looking deaths, especially if you're killing people with grenades. But the most important thing here is that this is just far more enjoyable to play, with checkpoints being consistent and balanced, so you're not replaying large chunks of missions over and over. Oh yeah, and speaking of the missions, there's quite a lot of variety in there as well. You start off in France before then heading to Africa, then Sicily, and then Normandy, because of course this game has to have its own version of a beach landing. And it's kind of like ever since Medal of Honor pulled that off years prior, that every World War II game that followed had to include one by law. In fact, Big Red One technically has two of them, because you got the one at Normandy during D-Day, but then there's an earlier one at Sicily during Operation Husky. Which, yeah, funnily enough, was also the opening mission during Medal of Honor Airborne. You know, just in case the comparisons between both series wasn't confusing enough to begin with. Both of these missions are pretty cool though, and for one of them, you're carrying around an MG the entire time on your hip, which is absolutely badass. I mean, just imagine being a German soldier and seeing someone sprinting towards you carrying around a goddamn Browning. The only thing that didn't really work for me was this short mission where you're inside a B-24 bomber, shooting back at German planes from all these various stations. And the reason this one didn't work for me is because you're expected to come to grips with how each of these stations function in a very short amount of time. But then it also doesn't seem to really matter because this mission seems unfailable. It keeps a tally of the amount of planes you've shot down, but as far as I can tell, this counts towards absolutely nothing. And it just kind of feels like they felt they had to include something to break up all the ground combat, so they went with this. But it really could have been just done away with entirely and not affected things at all. There's also like a couple of missions in there which have some of the worst fucking screen shaking I think I've ever seen. You know what I'm talking about? It's like that thing in video games where when explosions are going off, the entire screen violently shakes around to try to simulate the real world effect. But all it really does is just make aiming impossible and cause motion sickness. And there's like a couple of instances there where it literally made me nauseous and I had to take a break for 15 minutes so I didn't projectile vomit. If I had to complain about something else, which I will, I'd also say that the campaign just seems to go on for way too long, taking anywhere from 8 to 10 hours to beat. And I do feel like the best Call of Duty campaigns are the ones that are short and sweet, where you just get in there for 5 or 6 hours, blow a bunch of shit up, shoot a bunch of people, and then call it a day. Doing the same few objectives over and over for almost twice that amount of time though, even if it is with a bunch of different backdrops, like, it doesn't magically make it interesting or fun. Still though, when compared to Finest Hour, Big Red One is hands down the superior game. And combat fatigue aside, I had a lot more fun playing through it.
Something like that, Vic.
It's just like Treyarch really seemed to be able to hit the ground running here, and despite this one technically being a spin-off, it could have easily passed itself off as a mainline entry.
Damn good stuff, sir.
Which brings me on to the last console game in the list with 2008's World at War Final Fronts, developed by none other than Rebellion Developments. Bringing the whole thing back to its roots with two brand new campaigns, playing as a US soldier in the Pacific Theatre as well as back in Europe during the Battle of the Bulge, along with a campaign as a British dude as those guys were advancing into Germany. Now, not only is Final Fronts exclusive to the PlayStation 2, but it's also the last Call of Duty game to be developed for that 5th generation of consoles, and yeah man, does it ever show.
Turn hot!
Because this is easily one of the ugliest games in the entire franchise, especially by PS2 standards, and even more considering the time it came out. I mean, I do think some of the levels set in those snow areas look kinda decent, but everything else in the Pacific is just a pixelated, blurry mess. And it ain't exactly helping either that the game's running in widescreen, making it this constant, never-ending visual assault on your eyeballs. Now, to be honest, PS2 games were kinda blurry even at the best of times, and even a few titles that did support progressive scan are still harder on the eyes than the sight is of your mother wearing a see-through nightie.
You can't keep getting away with it!
But Final Fronts is just downright fuzzy, to the point that I actually started to wonder if there was something going on with my upscaler. I think the most annoying thing is how every time you hit a checkpoint, the game freezes up for like a second while it saves your progress.
Hold your fire! Those are friendlies from the 8!
And there's lots of in-game dialogue, particularly the combat chatter from enemies, which is just outright recycled from Call of Duty 2. The other dilemma is that it's kind of impossible to not compare this to World at War, which is still a visually impressive title, like even by today's standards. The flamethrower, for instance, is a grisly, nasty weapon that showed up in the original, being a really great example of how savage that combat was in the Pacific Theatre. So as you'd expect, this thing shows up in Final Fronts, only it's a shell of its former self, with a really bad looking effect and laughable animations. There's a tank mission thrown in there as well, only this time you're in Belgium instead of Germany, and this one again just pales in comparison to the one in the original. If nothing else, at least there's only one of these in total and it is quite short, but it's all just kinda hard to not shake the fact that you feel like you're playing a worse off version of a far superior game. Because of how bad the whole thing looks, half of the time I couldn't even tell who was who when I was in combat, because of how samey the colour palette was, really making it hard to distinguish between friend and foe. Just like in Big Red One, there's this handy snap-on feature when aiming down sights, and this was often the only way I could determine whether or not someone was hostile. There also seems to be lots of bizarre, random deaths in this one as well, where I get killed out of seemingly nowhere.
I want fire superiority! Keep it up!
We need a tourniquet!
What?
Which is doubly odd considering how bad the enemy AI actually is, where they do little more than just stand in one place and fire at you. The other obstacle here are your own allies, where they will again keep boxing you in over and over, like they're trying to outdo the Resistance members in Half-Life 2.
Good idea, Dr. Freeman.
I guess the good side is that yet again, Final Fronts is not very long, able to be beaten in like 3 or 4 hours. So like pulling out a tooth or ripping a band-aid off your asshole, it's over nice and quick.
I didn't think we were gonna make it out of there in one piece.
Overall, I think the main problem this one has is just its timing, considering it came out in 2008, which was a full 2 years after even Call of Duty 3. And it probably didn't help either that we were well and truly at that point where people were absolutely getting done with the whole World War II shooter era. Even the first Modern Warfare had come out a year earlier and totally reinvigorated the series by taking things in a new direction.
This is gonna be one hell of a highlight reel.
So to play another game at this point where all we were doing was the same crap we'd done 100 times, not to mention on a console which was well and truly past its expiration date, I mean it's like this thing just never stood a chance. And just consider that this is 2008, right? I mean, by this point, the PS3 and the Xbox 360 had been out for almost 2 years. And I didn't know anyone who was still using a PS2 by then, let alone paying money for something like this. Especially when World at War came out at the same time and was infinitely more impressive. Final Fronts is just a bit of a depressing swan song for the series on the 5th generation of consoles, and I'm sure it sold enough copies to warrant it being made, but at what cost?
Red Beach 3 is now clear. Carry on, Marines.
It does actually segue though into an interesting topic, and that's for the other PS2 port for Call of Duty, namely the port for Call of Duty 3 we got in 2006. Which I'd argue is even worse than Final Fronts, because at least Final Fronts was trying to do its own thing, being a completely unique campaign, whereas this version of COD 3 is just an objectively terrible alternative to the PS3 and the Xbox 360 version. Even just COD 3 on its own is an interesting game to discuss. I mean, it was a launch title for the PS3, for instance, which is unique alone, but then consider it's also the only mainline entry that didn't get released on the PC. And I know that opinions are like assholes over this thing where everyone's got one and most of them stink, but I still think there's something kind of cool about this entry. If only because it's the first title in the series to take advantage of that new and superior hardware, along with including a whole bunch of control gimmicks from that time, like the whole 6-axis mechanic. Looking at this infamous PS2 port though, it's a wonder Activision never got sued, because how they could expect people to pay money for this thing is just laughable. Laughable. I mean, just take a gander at it. It looks absolutely atrocious. Even more so when you look at it back to back, or I don't know, side to side, with the PS3 or the 360 version. It's kind of like when you play something on the PC, but turn all the visual options down to the absolute minimum, but then also go into a configuration file and mess around with things even more. Combined, of course, with an expected choppy frame rate that feels like it's barely able to make double digits. And if that ain't enough, it's also got terrible aiming acceleration, really making it borderline unplayable at times.
Out of here!
If you want to know the wildest thing about this, is how it somehow has a higher aggregate review score than the PS3 version does. I mean, what? Now consider that there's also a version made for the Nintendo Wii, which is somehow even worse, because this one has that really unintuitive nunchuck and Wiimote control scheme.
Come on, let's go!
And if you thought those QuickTime events were bad on the PlayStation 3, well, wait until you get a load of these on the Wii. I mean, I can barely even understand what these prompts are asking me to do.
What do you want?
It's not that simple.
What do you want?
This is of course all leading us down into the most interesting rabbit hole with all of these Call of Duty ports, and that's all the versions of the games we got for the Nintendo Wii, with there being one common theme throughout all of them, in that they're all consistently pretty terrible.
Right.
Now, all up, the Nintendo Wii saw ports for 5 of the games, with Call of Duty 3, World at War, Modern Warfare, Black Ops, and then Modern Warfare 3. And it's really with the Modern Warfare and Black Ops entries where you can truly see just the insane amount of downgrades they had to make to get these running. It's not really any kind of secret that the Wii wasn't exactly the most powerful console. And I think if anything, it was objectively the least powerful out of all the home consoles released at the time. Obviously when compared to the Xbox 360 and the PS3, where it often felt just like little more than an overclocked GameCube, where they're not really offering up that much of a visual upgrade. That didn't stop it from being wildly successful though, and it's still in the top 10 best-selling game consoles of all time. And yeah, like credit where credit is due, there was a whole bunch of innovative and addictive releases here, proving the old adage that gameplay is more important than graphics. Which is handy because being known as a hardware juggernaut, this thing was not. And right away from playing this Modern Warfare port, you can see why that is. Like in the opening prologue mission alone, where you're attacking the tanker with Captain Price, the sea is just replaced by this large black void that almost looks Lovecraftian.
Roger that, we're out of here. Faceplate, this is Big Bird. Package secured, returning to base. Out.
And the funny thing too is that I even died during this mission as well, for the first time, I think, ever. During the bit where you need to escape the ship before it's blown up, because I just couldn't see things clearly enough to find my way out. I mean, I probably finished the campaign on the PC a dozen times throughout the years, and I have never failed this once. Only to die here on the Nintendo Wii. Twice. During the daytime missions, like the ones in the Middle East, it honestly looks like something from an early PS2 title. And it also kind of reminded me of some of those earlier Delta Force games, in how all of these buildings and trees look like these blank 2D simplistic little shapes there off in the horizon. And when you're in a chopper shooting at dudes on the ground, they almost look like black silhouettes, like they're shadow people or something, with no detail whatsoever. So playing through this as someone who never really spent all that much time on the Wii back in the day, it really made me realise the massive divide between the Wii and then the PS3 and the Xbox 360, and then even more so when you compare it to the PC. The other factor is that yet again the controls here are just kind of awful, because it uses that super clunky control scheme where you aim and fire with the Wiimote but then strafe and move with the nunchuck. And look, like those controls are fine if the game is designed around that principle. There's plenty of shooters on the Wii, for instance, made from the ground up with this scheme in mind, and they work well enough. But when it's tacked onto a shooter that wasn't really designed around that system, you know, being slapped onto what's otherwise a normal shooter campaign, well then it just doesn't quite work. Because no one wants to have to be sitting in the front of their seat for hours on end, hunched forward in the ready position like they're turtling a fat shit. I don't know, man, it's just not comfortable or relaxing to play games like this. And I mean, yeah, like games aren't supposed to be a meditative experience. There is supposed to be some kind of duress, but that duress is supposed to be mental, as you're having to use your wits to overcome the challenge or whatever the game's throwing at you. It's not supposed to be a physical one. I don't know, like maybe it's a bit of a skill issue, but trying to hit the enemies in this game sometimes felt like I was trying to skewer a housefly with a toothpick.
Target reset. Whoa!
At least by the time that Black Ops and Modern Warfare 3 came around, they had the good sense to add in classic controller support, which instantly makes these games feel better to play. Even if Nintendo are a bunch of contrarians and swapped around the layout of the A and B and the X and Y buttons for no reason, other than just to be different from the Xbox controller. The thing is though, at least Modern Warfare still kinda looked like Modern Warfare. Black Ops, on the other hand, just looks like an entirely different game, and the visual downgrade in this one is somehow even worse.
Oh, shit.
I mean, for starters, some of the main characters don't even look like the same people anymore, like Woods for instance, and then Reznov. But it's when you start to see the gameplay in motion, again comparing it to the PS3 or the PC counterparts, we can really see just how drastically different both of these versions are.
Woods, you look like having shit.
And it's the kind of thing that reminds me of those preview renders you see for movies, you know, where they've got like some kind of elaborate action scene or a CGI sequence, and they plan the whole thing out in this very basic and unpolished animation style, before they then go back in and polish everything up and add in all the bells and whistles. The thing is though, all of Black Ops on the Wii looks like this. And even if you're not all that familiar with the original game, well, the difference is still staggering. I was staggered.
Excellent.
And out of all the examples which could show the massive difference in power between the Wii and the other platforms, well, this game right here, man, has to be one of the best ones.
Oh, shit!
That's actually hilarious.
During the Bay of Pigs mission, for instance, it's like the Wii is on its last legs, and I'm honestly amazed it even managed to keep up. A lot of the missions are cut down into segments as well, with loading screens interspersed, and a couple of them are just missing entirely, replaced instead by cinematics. Like that whole super cool sequence where you went to the Pentagon and met JFK, having that weird trip out where Mason imagines himself assassinating the guy. Yeah, well, now that's just a pre-rendered cutscene you simply watch.
I'm told that you are the very best that we have. Anywhere.
Ich bin ein Springfield swap meet patron.
At least Black Ops on the Nintendo DS was trying to do its own thing. This, however, is another instance of something just being a far worse off way to experience a much better game.
We can do this all day. We got plenty of windows.
If nothing else though, I will say that on a positive note, this is still motherfucking Black Ops at the end of the day. I mean, yeah, dog, easily one of the best campaigns in the entire series. In fact, I think it was this game in particular that introduced me to what Dragon's Breath shotgun shells actually are. Not to mention some of the missions, like the prison break or the chase scene through Kowloon City, are still absolutely awesome highlights. You got some of the series' most memorable characters like Woods and Reznov, who are still utter badasses and the kind of dudes who chew up rocks and piss out gravel. Alongside one of the best mindfuck plot lines in the entire franchise. I mean, yeah, the numbers, Mason, what do they mean?
The numbers, Mason. What do they mean?
Not to mention, this one has arguably the best multiplayer, with some of the series' most iconic maps, weapons, and modes, as well as of course including the ever-popular zombies, even if it is only one map this time. So you know what, despite this being a massively downgraded version, which it really is, you can't ignore the fact that you're still getting Black Ops in most of its entirety, even if it does all look like this. This does lead me on to the last point that I want to make, and that's this trend with the Black Ops games, where from that point on, every third game in this series really seemed to receive the short end of the stick. Starting with Black Ops 3, for instance, in 2015, which had a really crappy port on the PS3 and the Xbox 360, where they even outright removed the campaign mode and just included the multiplayer and the zombies. As if they just couldn't be bothered trying to figure out how to get that thing working on the older systems, so they thought, fuck it. But even then, like, the multiplayer that we did get just looks and runs really poorly, with dated visuals and a super choppy frame rate, far from the 60 FPS standard that the series had always seemed to strive for with its online component.
advised. Hostile UAV incoming.
Getting actual matches going with real people is pretty much impossible these days, though thankfully you can still set up your own matches against the bots and mess around with the game in that way. But I've really got to wonder why you'd ever bother. You know, just to play a worse off version of what you could experience on the PS4 or the PC. This version is the result yet again of something coming out right near the end of a console generation's life cycle. And consider that by this point, the PS4 and the Xbox One had already been out for like 2 years. So yeah, it's like Final Fronts all over again. If nothing else, it sure didn't seem to hurt sales figures, considering that Black Ops 3 is still amazingly the highest selling game in the entire Call of Duty franchise. Even though I kind of wonder how many of those numbers actually came from people on the PS3 or the 360.
Enemy down.
And then of course a similar thing also happened with the release of Black Ops 6 on the PlayStation 4 in 2005. And in fact this time the console was even older, with the gap between Black Ops 3 and the launch of the PS3 being 9 years, but then with Black Ops 6 and the PS4 it was 11. And I could probably do like an entire video just looking at this one alone, but thankfully people far more talented than me have already gone into extensive detail on just how undercooked this game actually is visually compared to the current gen consoles. And again, like the crazy part is that it hardly seemed to affect sales. If anything, I mean it probably helped it, considering Black Ops 6 was the highest selling video game for all of 2024.
Oh, shit.
I think the most egregious thing about this version though is that even after buying a physical copy of this to test out on my own console, I still had to download a couple 100 gigabytes worth of updates, and then still download the actual content for both the campaign and the multiplayer modes. But if nothing else, it is kind of insane how an 11-year-old platform was somehow able to keep up with the current day game release.
That's how you drive.
The good thing about this series is that you never really run out of stuff to talk about, and I'm sure a few years down the track there'll be a whole heap of other ports or versions that would merit a video as well. And even in this last half hour, I really barely scratched the surface on the other ways you can play these games, considering there's a bunch of versions also made for the handheld platforms like the PSP and the Nintendo DS. If nothing else though, I hope this video has helped to shed a bit of light on some of the Call of Duty titles that might have fallen to the wayside over the years. And although a lot of these aren't all that great and won't be seeing remakes or remasters anytime soon, they're still at least a hell of a lot better than Call of Duty Ghosts.